everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I was gonna start this video at that spot where I practice my wheelies and practice wheelies, but there was a cop there, so we shall not anymore. We're just out on the good old R3 today, and I've been seeing a lot of stuff about the new Aprilia RS457 that I want to talk about. And a lot of people are hyping this up as the best beginner bike, and oh, it's the new standard for beginner bikes, and it's the best one you can get, and all this stuff. And I just couldn't disagree more. I would say that it's not a very good beginner bike, and for the US market, it's definitely not a good beginner bike. And that's for a lot of reasons. But part of it is that the reason for the RS457 existing is entirely because of the A1, A2 licensing requirements and tiers that exist in Europe, right? So A2 or A1, you get first maximum 125cc, A2 maximum like 47 horsepower, and that's exactly what the Aprilia RS has. It just puts its toes squarely on the line of the top end of basically the legal limit. And I'm all for saying screw the man, you know, and doing what you want with that. But I will say, like, there's a reason why you don't want a super powerful bike and why power isn't the top spec you should be looking at for a beginner bike, honestly. And the RS to me just defeats the point, because to me, I'm not looking for a lot of power when I was looking for a beginner bike, right? When I was looking at beginner bikes, I was considering 250s, 300s, stuff like that, right? CBR 250Rs, R3s, Ninja 400s, stuff that's really limiting how much trouble you can get yourself into, right? And the reason why I'd say the Aprilia RS457, and also, quite frankly, the Ninja ZX4R doesn't qualify as a beginner bike is because these are entirely different machines after you tune them and put an exhaust on them. So if you invest $500 into the bike, you can be making almost double the horsepower, which means it is not the same machine at all that you're getting on before and after a tune. And if you ride, you know, your friends with a tune, it's going to be a very different machine, right? The ZX4R makes about 50 horsepower from the factory, but after a tune and an exhaust, you're making 80 plus horsepower. That's not the same machine. And the RS is going to be the same way. I already know people are going to be tuning it like crazy. So let's talk real quick what makes a good beginner bike. And so a good beginner bike, in my opinion, three main things. The number one goal of a beginner bike is seat time. So when you're a beginner, you need seat time because you have to learn, right? And so seat time comes from having a reliable machine that has service when you need service support. So question, is Aprilia known for reliability? Well, when they survey and do studies on motorcycle manufacturers, Aprilia doesn't even show up in the quality reliability kind of a survey, right? Yamaha's number one, and then you find Suzuki, Kawasaki, Honda, maybe not necessarily in that order, but they're all really close to each other. And then down the list you have Harley and some others, right? But Aprilia is not even on the list of reliability. And I don't know if that's because they don't sell enough machines per year or what, or if they wouldn't submit data to the study or what it was. But the fact that Aprilia is not even on the study of reliability means they probably are very low on it. And if you look if you just look anecdotally across Reddit and things like that, you will find that a lot of people have stories of reliability issues with Aprilias and service network issues, where in the United States you just can't get that good of service on them because there aren't that many dealerships in the United States. So probably a different story in Italy, definitely, I would imagine, and across Europe. But as far as in the United States, if you get one of these bikes, right, and it breaks down early on, so let's say you've been riding for a few months, it breaks down, it sits in the dealership waiting for parts for a couple weeks, gets service, right? And some of these stories I've heard, people are like these things are sitting in dealerships for months, and so that means you're basically going back and having to relearn everything you learned. If you were new to a motorcycle and you're restarting now, then you lose all your progress and you're kind of back to being like a beginner. And so I just think that's bad news. And also on the reliability front, this is made not even by Aprilia. It's made in India at the Piaggio factory, which is a factory that's used to making scooters. So the fact that it doesn't actually bear the name on it of the company that's building it, right? It's just basically being licensed, sort of, makes me really curious about how much pride there is in the build of it and quality and what people will find. Because ultimately it's not Aprilia controlling 100% of this bike, because it's being made in someone else's factory. Now, the second most important thing for a beginner bike is low barriers to entry. So, low barriers to entry mean a low cost to buy initially, a low cost to repair, a low seat height, and lightweight. Right? And you could add something else maybe if you wanted, but those would be for the biggest keys you would see across beginner bikes. And the RS is not cheap. I think Yami Noob said he paid about $8,500 for his out the door. So in my opinion, $8,500, you could go get yourself, you know, like a couple of used bikes. You could get yourself a used dual sport, a used, you know, CBR 250R, a 300R. You get so much more bang for the buck. You go get yourself a used R6, right? You could get a cheap bike to begin with and sell it, and then, you know, roll that money plus some new money for a total of $8,000 into your second bike, right? $8,000 for me is more than double what I've ever spent on a bike. And I've got the R3, the FZ07, all these things, and to me it's like, no way, I would not spend that much on a beginner bike, because you're gonna drop it. It's a beginner bike, and the purpose is to learn to make mistakes with it. And so it's just not a very good beginner bike, because it's too expensive in the first place, let alone what it might cost to service it or anything like that, which we don't really know yet because they haven't been out long enough. And then low seat height, I'm not sure what the RS's seat height really is, but everyone's talking about it as being like very like high-end sporty and stuff, so that might mean it has a higher seat height than your average beginner bike is gonna have. And then lightweight, it actually weighs 40 pounds more than the new Ninja 500. So the Ninja 500 came along, obviously the Ninja 400, which was the gold standard beginner bike. And so it's 40 pounds more. 40 pounds is a big deal when you're a beginner. I remember my first bike was low 400s, 440 or 420 pounds to 440 pounds, something like that. And that bike was too much for me to handle coming straight out of the MSF. Like, I dropped that bike at least twice. And so that's why I think having a lightweight bike is so important. And honestly, I still like having lightweight bikes. I still love riding this R3 because it's so flickable. It's so easy. I can load it into the back of a car myself and take it to the track or take it somewhere on a trip. And so there's lots of stuff you can do with it. And then the third thing to look for a beginner bike is less consequences for mistakes. You're inevitably going to make mistakes with a beginner bike, and so we just want to lessen the consequences of it. And part of that is you want less power, so you get less speeding tickets, less high of speeding tickets if you get them, and you don't get as injured, because speed is the number one thing that's going to end your motorcycling, right? The two things The most common things for beginners are going to be you were speeding, you were going too fast. Cycle Cruiser actually just covered one of these roads, a fairly beginner rider going way too fast on a bike, and she died. And so speed is the number one thing that's going to hurt you, like seriously bad, and end the motorcycle. And the second thing is going to be tip overs, where you injure your leg. You injure your leg, your ankle, your foot, something like that. And that's why they say, and Ryan49 talks about this a lot, number one piece of protection to have as a beginner is some kind of protective shoes, right? Because that's your most common injury as a beginner. So get a lightweight bike, you have less weight falling onto your foot and ankle and stuff to break it and injure it. If you don't have those injuries, you can keep riding, you can keep progressing. If you get those injuries, you're done riding for a little while. And then for speeding tickets and less consequences, a beginner bike you just can't go that fast on. This bike, you're sitting on the rev limiter, six gear, you know, rev limiter, about 108 miles an hour. You're not going to spend the night in prison for going 108 miles an hour, probably, especially because the speedometer is probably wrong. It's probably very optimistic. You're probably doing 100, 103, I don't know, something like that. And so you'll have less speeding tickets, which means you can keep riding. You're not spending your money on speeding tickets. I mean, I think it's super thrilling to be able to shift through multiple gears and redline multiple gears before you even come close to hitting the speed limit where you're going to be getting in trouble, right? But if you get a 600 as your new bike, or if you even buy, you know, a tuned RS457 or a tuned ZX4R, these things people are considering beginner bikes, I mean, you're going to be going pretty fast, 80 horsepower, 80 plus horsepower on a ZX4R. I mean, you should be able to go at least 120, if not, you know, 130, I would think, with that weight. And so the consequences are too high when you get into that. Now, what do I think the RS455 works for? I think it works for people who are experienced track day riders or much more advanced. We're just gonna go for it. People who are much more advanced than beginners, right? So if you're walking into your A2 license and you've ridden and you've got experience and stuff like that, then potentially it makes sense. But I think it makes more sense for someone who's very track focused, almost like a dedicated track bike, where you want something that's better to learn on than a leader bike, right? You don't want 150, 200 horsepower, and you just enjoy the small bike life, right? I mean, that's the reason why I keep this R3. I paid $1,800 for this R3. It runs reliably. I've literally never had to do anything to it. And all I've done is preventative maintenance, oil changes. I changed the spark plugs once, super easy job. It's required nothing. It fires up and runs every time, and it's given me tons of good experiences and the opportunity to learn tons of skills. And I still keep this bike because I take it to the racetrack and I ride it sometimes on mornings like this because it's just fun. It just is fun. And people who want to pretend like, oh, beginner bikes have no power, they're not fun, anything like this, they're just missing a lot of the fun of motorcycling. You don't have to be going super fast. Sometimes you can get the sensation of speed when not actually going that fast, and that's probably the key to help you live a lot longer and enjoy many years of motorcycling. So I think the RS, you know, if you want a more exotic track kind of focused machine where that TFT makes a big deal to you, and having adjustable suspension and being able to tune it for more power, then go ahead, fine. But I just think for the beginner rider, and the beginner rider who's watching Yami Noob talk about how, oh, this is such a good beginner bike and all this stuff, I mean, remember, he has it as a giveaway bike, so he has to make the bike seem desirable. Because if he tells you this bike would be a terrible beginner bike or anything like that, then you won't buy the giveaway stuff and he won't make his money back on it, right? He needs people to buy the entries to the sweepstakes so that he can make his money back on the bike. And you know, you just need to be aware of the agendas. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that he's a very experienced rider. He's a very experienced track rider. Of course, I think he's gonna like it because he'd probably find, you know, some of the more anemic bikes like a CBR 250R, CBR 300R, things like that. Of course, he's gonna find those probably much less entertaining, right? So, all of that to say, the RS, not an amazing beginner bike, costs too much. And that was one thing I will say Yaminu talked about, where he was like, it would be the best beginner bike if you got it used. And I guess trying to save this squirrel's life. And I agree with him that when the cost comes down, it will be a much more attractive beginner bike, but we'll still be waiting to see how reliable it is. Because, you know, if you get one of these used with 10,000 miles on it and it breaks down all the time, it's not a good beginner bike, right? Because we want something reliable, we want something to have a lot of seat time in. So let me know what you think about the RS. Have you ridden one? Do you like it? Did anyone buy one? I'm sure that probably feels very very targeted by this perhaps, but I'm not targeting you. I'm just trying to help people avoid making a mistake that wouldn't really be benefiting from any of the features. Because ultimately, you don't need a TFT dash, you don't need adjustable suspension, you don't need, you know, the maximum amount of power you can as a beginner. Those are three unproductive things for a beginner. So, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all on the next video.